Hello everyone, and welcome to our live online learning overview with our Director of Technical Training, John Carlson. He'll give us some information about live online and then actually go through a class exercise with us. So John, I'll pass the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Corrine. So we're doing this webcast today to basically go over our live online learning tool. You know, it's a product that we've offered for a couple of years. People have been hesitant to use it. It's something different. And so we want to do the webcast to go through and talk about, how it works, and then just to go through and answer some of those questions, and hopefully you'll see it can be used for yourself. Now, basically with the live online learning, it's basically a class that you take over the web. Everything is pretty much the same, but we try and go through and do it over the web, which basically gives us a lot of flexibility and convenience. That's the main reason why you would go through and probably consider this type of training. There's no travel costs. You don't have to go anywhere. The instructor doesn't have to come to you. So the travel costs are nothing. You can really connect from anywhere. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can attend class from work, from at home, whatever makes it easiest for you. And then also it is instructor-led. That's why most people don't want to go through and take web training. They like the instructor experience. Well, there is going to be an instructor available to ask questions to. He's just going to be, on the other end of the computer is really the only difference. And then also one of the main advantages of the live online is it does give you a wider access to our trainers. We've got some people that specialize in certain areas. We've got a really good manufacturing person. We've also got a really good analysis person. But, we've only got one of those people. So, if you're in California, our analysis person's in Toronto, he may come to the West Coast just a couple times a year. So it's tough to get into those classes. Where you do it over the web, it's easy to connect wherever he's located at. And then the question always comes up, what classes can we do, live online? We can go through and do any class. So any of our CATIA classes, CATIA Composer, even the Creo classes that we teach, if we can do it in a classroom setting, we can do it live online as well. So there's really no limits there. And then what is needed to make the live online work? Well, you just really need a reliable internet connection. That would be the main thing that you would need to go through and do it. Also, you do need to have some type of audio connection. You can call in through the phone. You can use your computer, voice over IP if you want. Whatever you find easiest to do, either of those options will work. And it's also nice, again, to have a quiet place to work, So some people stay at home and do it there, or if you're going to be at work, if you've got an office that you can close the door, or maybe find a nice quiet conference room and do it there. And then also, obviously, you need a computer that has the software loaded on it. So we're going to do a CATIA class. You just need to have access to that software to be able to run through the lab exercises in the class. And then what will you get before class begins? Well, every student will get a hard copy book. So you are going to have a book that you can write in and jot notes in, just like you would get if you came to our training centers and took the class there. That will be sent to you beforehand. Also, you're going to have a link to download the training model. If we use any type of model in any of the exercises, you'll download those training models beforehand, and you can just open them up from that location and you download them too. And then also, you get a WebEx invite to the different sessions. So if it's a 5-day class, you get an invite that you can just pick on in the morning. It'll take you right into the training center class then. So it's really easy then to access the live online. And then how it works. We try and keep it as close as possible as, an instructor-led would do it. So you're going to go through and just connect to the classroom through WebEx. Once you pick on your WebEx link, you'll be in the classroom. And then the instructor is going to basically behave the exact same way he would in an in-person training class. He's going to go through and give the lecture content for the different chapters as they work along. Once he's gone through and given that lecture, you're then going to go through and basically he'll demonstrate the key points from that chapter to show you, hey, here's the key things that you need to pay attention to as you're working along. Once he's given the demonstration, the students are going to work on the lab exercises that go along with that particular chapter. And so depending upon the class, there may be one lab exercise up to 5 different ones that go along with that. You would work on those, but the instructor will be available to you to answer questions. And then at the very end, once you've completed the lab exercises, the instructor will just conduct a quick review. Okay, this is the main points from the last chapter, and now we're going to go and build on that in the next chapter. He'll review everything as you work along. And then the classes are kept small. We do recognize it's a little bit more difficult when you're doing it over the web to go through and ask questions and stuff. So, our typical in-center, we would limit 12 people to a class there. Live online, we're going to limit the maximum to be 8. Typically, the classes will be smaller than that, typically you'll see anywhere from 2 to 5 people in most live online classes that we do. And then keep in mind, questions can be asked at any time. So you can ask during the lectures, during the demonstration. If you get stuck on a lab exercise, you'll be able to talk to the instructor at any time throughout the day. And then we do use WebEx to do our live online training. And we use WebEx because it has a number of handy features that make it easy to do. One is there is an annotate feature, and so the instructor can actually annotate things. So as a slide comes up or something, and maybe there's, hey, I want to show you something special, he can go through and bring up the annotate command. He can go through and create different types of annotations. I'm just going to create a couple of annotations here on the screen for you. So again, I can go through and draw lines if I wanted to. I could go through and make rectangle page, look at this area right here. So with the annotate tool, again, you'll be able to go through and annotate anything that you see on the screen. Now, it actually works both ways. When you look at the bottom of the screen here on the slide, there's the toolbar at the top. That's the toolbar the instructor sees. And then the toolbar at the bottom is the toolbar that the student sees. So notice there's actually an annotate tab down below. The students can actually annotate back on the instructor's presentation as you work along. So that's a really nice feature inside. And then also there is a chat feature. Again, if you don't want to ask your question necessarily over the phone, you can go through and ask your question through the chat feature that's available to you inside the system on there. And then one of the main things that we like to use WebEx for is it does give the instructor the ability to view the student screen. So if a student is working on a lab exercise and they were to get stuck somewhere, basically the instructor can make that student the presenter, and then he can see what they see on their screen, and he can then help them through their particular problem on there. And also the student or the instructor can take control of the keyboard, the other person's keyboard. So again, if it's a really big problem, the instructor could take over the keyboard and actually run the mouse and the keys to go through and show them how to do it if necessary on there. Now, with those two choices, you have to allow that person to do it. So you don't have to worry if there's, hey, I'm worried about somebody seeing something that they shouldn't see. The instructor cannot see your screen unless you allow them to see it. Same thing with the keyboard control. We must allow them before they can do that. And like we talked about earlier, the student can listen to the audio either over phone or through their computer. Whatever you find easiest, WebEx supports all those things inside. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of those annotations. And then to access the software for class. Obviously, you do need to have access to the software that we're teaching to run through the lab exercises. There's a couple different ways to do it. Typically, the students will go through and run the software on their computer at work. So basically, that's the easiest way to do it. You're using your licenses to go through and do the class. Now, if you've got a limited number of licenses in a certain area, we potentially could go through and provide temporary licenses for you, be able to attend training while other people use those licenses back at work. Now, if we're going to do that, though, there is an added cost. We do get charged for those licenses from Dispel. And then as the last possibility, you could also actually, through WebEx, access a RAN computer. We can go through and set up basically a training lab, and then on that computer that you access, the software would be already on it. Now, we use that as a last resort just because it's a little bit slower. You've got to connect to the RAN computer, and then it has to present the information back to you. But that's also another possibility if you don't have the software necessary to take the class. And then after class, you've got questions, I'm sure, after class. And so you do have the capability of emailing your instructor with questions after class. We don't put a limit on how time or anything. If you've got follow-up help, just email your instructor. They'll get back to you and help you as best they can as we go along. So that's basically, kind of how we go through and do the live online. Now, the next thing I want to go through and show you is I just want to go through and give you kind of a quick demonstration. How would we present a chapter, and how would we go through and give the demonstration, and what you would basically see through WebEx. So I'm actually going to come back over here now, and I'm going to actually bring up another set of PowerPoint slides here that we'll go through and talk about one of the chapters out of our Intro to Modeling class from CATIA on here. So this happens to be chapter number 5, the Pad and Pocket chapter. Now, I'm not going to go through and do the entire chapter to save some time. I'm going to go through and just talk about the Pad feature here really quickly, and then I will go through and give you a quick demonstration, kind of show you the demo that would go along with that to give you an idea how it works. Okay, in the last chapter, chapter number 4, we went through and talked about the sketcher and how to go through and fully constrain your sketches. Now in chapter number 5, we want to start to look at taking those sketches and turning them into solids. And so we're going to turn them basically into pockets and pads in this chapter. Now, once you've got your sketch created, if you were to make a pad out of it, it would go to an add material. So you can see they're taking that L-shaped sketch and they're turning it into the L-shaped solid that you see down below. Now, if you were to go through and take that sketch and turn it into a pocket, you would just basically remove material. So now they're cutting away out of that block the shape that you see. So that's what we're going to talk about here in chapter 5. Now here is the pad feature. Now again, to get started, once you got your sketch created, you would just come over and pick basically the pad command on the right, and it's going to go through and bring up the dialog box that you see here on the screen. Now on the dialog box, notice there's an area here where it says profile surface. It wants me to go through and pick a sketch. What sketch are you going to turn into the pad? So once you've selected that, it's going to list the name there, sketch.1. And then really all you have to do is up above here is go through and give it a length. It's going to go through and make that 100 millimeters long in this example. Now you also notice there's some other choices down below. One is I could reverse the direction. If you were to go through and pick that choice, it would flip then that pad and it would go the other way from the sketch plane. Now you could also pick that orange arrow on the screen and you could accomplish the same thing if you wanted to. And then you'll also notice there is a mirrored extent button right here. Notice it's adding 100 millimeters, but it's all on one side. If you were to go through and turn on the mirrored extent, it would go through and add that same distance on the back side. So whatever you have on the front side, you've got exactly the same on the back. Now, what if I want those two to be different? I don't want them both to be 100. What you could do if I go back one slide here is you could come down here and in the corner there's a more button. And if you were to pick on the word more, it would actually expand out the dialog box and give me more choices. So now you can see it gets bigger. And so I notice there's a second limit. So in the first limit, they're going through and making the length 50, and then in the second limit, they're going through and making it 100. So it doesn't have to be evenly split if you don't want it to be. That would be the basics of making a pad. Now once you've got that information filled in, you would just come down below and say OK, and the pad would be created. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. If you are going to take a sketch and turn it into a pad, it does have to meet certain requirements. And so if you pick a sketch that doesn't meet the requirements, it may come back and give you some type of error message on your screen. Hey, this is not valid for the feature that you want to create. So basically the requirements are you have to have a closed sketch. So back in this example that we looked at, we had a closed L shape. So that's a valid sketch. Whereas here in the example in the middle of the screen, if you try to turn this into a pad, it would give you the error message. You've got intersecting elements. It doesn't know what area to extrude and what area not to extrude. So that would not work. You would need to go back and change your sketch first. And then also there's this open sketch over here, and they just got 2 lines on the example on the right. So that would also be invalid to start. It could be valid, though, if you went back and turned on what they call the thick option here in the dialog box. That would ungray the corner thin pad area over here, and you could give it thickness. But for right now, we're just going to say that that's invalid. We're going to come back later and talk about specifically thin pads and pockets later in class. So it's basically got to be a closed section to work. And then once you've got that first pad created again, you can now come back and make as many additional pads on top of that as you want. You just have to obviously have a flat surface to place the sketch on as you start to create the additional features. And then with the different pads and pockets, there are going to be some different depth options. It defaults up here to dimension, and with dimension, that's where you would go to and just basically give it a length. I want to make it 20 millimeters long, and then that length doesn't change unless you specifically edit that number. But there's some other choices here as well. I could go through and say up to next. Now in this example that you see, they're going through and using as their sketch support this end surface. Well, that's where all the sketches begin. If I say up to next, it goes to the next space and it stops, whatever that distance may be. Now there's also going to be an up to last on the drop down as well. And if you were to go through and say up to last, it would extrude from the sketch support up to the last face, so the opposite side of the Z. Now with up to next and up to last, there's also going to be with offset that you can turn on if you want. So that's what they actually show you here. So they're going up to the last face, plus they also specified an offset, let's say another 5 millimeters. So it goes beyond that by that much on there. You could also use a negative number and make it go short of whatever that up to next or last item is as well. And then you have up to plane and up to surface. Now, these two are very similar to each other. They both require that you pick something from the screen. So if you were to go through and say up to plane, you would need to go through and pick basically a flat plane or surface. So I picked the opposite side of the Z, that one vertical face. It's going up to that, and it's simply stopping when it gets to that plane. Now, with up to surface, you have to pick something, but it doesn't have to be planar, but it does have to be a solid surface in your part. So they're going through and using this one face down below here as their up to surface. So it extrudes from that in sketch support up to that, and it stops. But that does not have to be planar to make it work. But the sketch must fall inside that face. So you can see that that circle sketch is completely inside the surface they selected to make it work. So those are the different depth options that you would get. Now again, you're going to get those depth options in the first limit. You're also going to get those same depth options in the second limit. So again, you can mix and match them together. So again, in this example here, their sketch plane is that end of the block. They're just going first limit 20 millimeters. The second one, they're going up to surface that you see. And then also, when you are going through making a pad or a pocket, by default, it is always going to go through and go normal to profile. Again, that is actually a choice in the dialog box. So you can see your direction, normal to profile. So whatever you go through and sketch on, whatever face, it would normally take that and would extrude perpendicular to that. But what if I want to extrude off across at an odd angle? You could turn off the normal to profile, and you could then pick a reference. And so in this example, they're taking that sketch, and they're using this line here as the direction reference that tells them which way to go. So that would be an example of typically what we would go through and do then in the lecture. So again, I'm not going to do the complete chapter. There's also some more information here on pockets that I'm going to go through and kind of skip by right now. Now, once the instructor, though, had gone through the lecture, he would then go through and talk about basically the demonstration. Okay, so now that we've gone through and looked at the slides, let me just give you a quick demonstration here on going through and making a pad. Now you can see I've already got CATIA started. I've already got a sketch created. And again, my sketch is fully constrained, but now I want to make that into a pad, so I'm just going to hit the pad button over here on the right. And then this is where when the dialog box comes up, it's going to ask me to pick the profile. Well, that's where I'm going to go through and select on my sketch. And now it's really simply a matter of going through and specifying the length. Now again, I can go through and key in a length up above here to go through and change it that way. Okay, I want to make this 56 long. That would be one way to do it. I can double click on the number here on the screen, and I could change the number that way. Okay, it's really only supposed to be 44. Or I could even come over here once I've done that, because I could actually drag this word limit 1. That would also let me change the length, dragging it if I wanted to as well. And again, if I was to pick the arrow here or pick reverse direction, that's where it would flip it the other way. So you can have it go either direction from that plane. Now again, if I come down here and turn on the mirrored extent, that's where it's going to add the same distance on the other side. Now if I want this not to be even, I want it to be a different distance on the back side, I would turn off the mirrored extent and then come over here and say more. And then really it's just a matter of coming over here and putting the length in for the second direction. Okay, I want to go through, and the first one's 92. I'm going to come over and say, okay, I want that to be 33. And it's then going to go through and make it 33 in the opposite direction. So it's really just a matter of, making sure you've got the right depth setting. Now, you've got the kind of the orange quick preview. If you want to get a more detailed preview of what this is going to look like, you could say preview here and see it. But then once it looks good, it's really just a matter of coming over here and saying okay to go through and complete that feature. Now, typically in class, we'd go through and show you a little bit more on the demonstration. We'd also give you some examples of pockets and stuff as well. But I'm just going to leave it at that. That gives you a pretty good idea of what you would see, though, on the live online training. Now, the other thing you would then do is you would work on the lab exercises. So the instructor would come back and talk about what the lab exercises deal with. So again, if I come back over here and just go forward a couple of slides, okay, now we want to go through and start to take a look at the lab exercises here that go along with this particular chapter. So there's really a lot of lab exercises. The first one here, you're just going to go through and make a sketch that you're then going to go through and turn into just a simple pad. On the second exercise, there's going to go through and be some base geometry already created here, but you're going to go through and add a number of different pockets on here to get the shape that you see. And on 5C here, they're going to go through and talk a little bit about working with open sketches. You can go through and use the solid to close it off, so they're going to have you go through and add kind of this little stiffener that you see there on the part. 5D, again, you're going to build this part from scratch, and you're going to go through and there's a number of different pads and pockets that create that. And then if you have time, there's a bunch of optional exercises that go along with this chapter here as well. You know, there's 5E, 5F, and 5G. You're going to build these parts that you see and create the shapes. They'll give you very limited instructions on those. So if you get stuck anywhere, just let me know. I'll be glad to help you out as you go through on those exercises. So then once the instructor kind of explained what the exercises deal with, you would then go through and turn to that chapter in your book, and you would start to work on them as you're going along. That would really be the basics of how the live online training would work. And then once you've completed those live exercises again, you would then come back and do the review, and then go on to the next chapter on there. And we would typically go through about 5 or 6 chapters a day, depending upon the complexity of them in the typical class. So that's how the live online training is done. Now, the last thing I do want to mention is we are currently having a promotion that goes along with that. And so if you are interested in live online training, if you do think, you know, this is potentially something that you are interested in, we currently have 25% off on any live online training class that we're doing. So just talk to your sales representative. They can get you signed up. And so this is going to be for the summer. You know, it'll go back to the regular price a little bit later on this year.